So how's it going, guys? This is Real Murata photographer based in Tokyo. So in this video I'll be talking about the Sekonic Flashmate model L-308B in particular. And if you guys probably know that my main sort of like light meter is this Flashmate L-308X that I've been using for the past like trips and stuff like that. I previously used the S version, but I upgraded to the X version because you can use this during pitch black long exposure time or scenarios. But there was a time when this was acting a little bit finicky, so I was basically looking at Mercari, which is basically a sort of like a Craiglist type of site in Japan, what a lot of locals use, and I saw a person selling the L-308B version, the first gen I got actually, for roughly $40–50. So I basically snagged it. I used it, and this is sort of like a clarification of, I guess, the major difference between the 308B, which is a great entry level light meter, and the current still in production light meter by Sekonic, the L-308X, and also the S that I previously used. Long story short, I guess the 308X currently costs like roughly $150 to $200. It's really expensive. I bought mine used from a reputable like location, but the Sekonic Flashmate L308B, on the other hand, you can basically snag it for $40–50, like 1/4 the price. So yeah, that's one area to note. This is really not expensive in that sense because it's already discontinued. And there's a lot of people selling this for various types of reasons, but I guess you can find this like on any kind of eBay type of site. They're like floating around. So chronological order, the 308 series, the B was basically Sekonic's first light meter that is in this sort of like compact arena. And they previously had a light meter. I was taking a photo for you guys that you basically manually had to adjust the sort of like dials to get it dialed in. I don't recommend those types of light meters due to the fact that they are really cumbersome. If you have a lot of time at your spare hand, I mean, no doubt those are also efficient in that sense in terms of readings. However, like physically changing, altering the dials and looking at the needle where it like, points at, you basically had to like dial that in to get the correct exposure. That basically takes a lot of time, so I won't recommend that. However, the 308 series, what made this, I guess, popular among a lot of film photographers and I guess studio flash photographers out there was that it was really compact. In addition, and compared to the older types of like light meters, there was an LCD screen which you basically punch in the shutter speed and the ISO value and you just do the readings and you can get the gist of the aperture. So this was basically favored among a lot of people. Even nowadays, a lot of film users have the 308 series, but I never had the opportunity to basically showcase the 308B, which basically was their first iteration of the 308 series, and I thought it would make sense for you guys because this is a really valuable and also budget-friendly conscious sort of like light meter in the market right now. Okay, so the Sekonic Flashmate L308B and also the S and the X are considered to do meterings of both incident and reflective, and hopefully you did your photography lessons because there was a lot of teachers who can do like teach you better than I do. But long story short, to sum it up for you guys, when you meter for incidents and I guess reflective metering, there's this lumisphere up here. If you slide this or cover the lens, it becomes incident, and when you uncover it, it becomes reflective. And educational recap for you guys, incident and reflective meterings are basically the two different ways of measuring light in photography. Incident metering measures the light falling on the subject, while reflective metering, you're measuring the light reflected by your subject. So current digital cameras nowadays, and some I guess film cameras, have reflective metering, so that's like basically light reflective against that subject. The camera's basically reading that, and that's basically what you see on, let's say, the Nikon F3, the bottom or maybe the side of the screen. There's this sort of like exposure value. If it's dead center, that is perfectly fine, but it might go to minus or plus, which means it's underexposed or I guess overexposed. So yeah, some education. So there's, like I said, there's like a lot of great teachers talking about using light meters, so I'll try to make this short as possible. But when you do incident, so you have the dome in front, you do this when you're photographing, let's say, a model or something, or someone that you can basically physically walk towards to, then you can basically sort of like measure correctly. However, in most cases, if you're shooting landscapes or if you're shooting some kind of, I guess, object or buildings that is like miles away, you can't physically walk like 1 mile or 2 miles down the road because that's gonna take forever. You basically use the reflective, so you expose the sort of like the sensor and basically take a reading of that subject. And normally speaking, this is just my sort of like personal experience. Reflective is less, how should I say, not efficient in that sense because you're facing the sensor towards your subject. However, there's like various types of like light coming. If the sun's like really high, it could like come from this direction and can expose the sort of like the sensors, and you might get non-precise sort of like readings. And in those cases, this is where it's limited at in that sense. And if you purchase something that's much more expensive, such as the L-858, there's actually a better light meter than this, which has a sort of like a lens which you can physically spot meter that location. A lot of professionals have the 800 series light meters from Sekonic because you can basically sort of like move your light meters at your shadows and also your highlights and also the right side of the building and stuff like that. You can do precise meterings. This one, on the other hand, can't do that. So what I do is I typically face it forward, like vertically, and then I basically tilt it 45 degrees to meter the sort of like the exposure of the skies, and then basically face it 45 degrees down to sort of like meter the sort of like the ground. And I basically sort of like look at the dynamic range of those 2-3 spots and to like find that, you know, the perfect sort of like exposure value. But I'm going a little bit off topic, but yeah, going back onto topic about talking about the Sekonic L-308B. Okay, so the 308B and the 308X are completely exactly the same in terms of dimensions, the shape, and also the weight. If I'm right, they might be a little bit different in terms of just grams, but they use the exact same components in terms of batteries. They use AA batteries, just one. And the B version is a sort of like a shutter priority light meter. So you basically select the shutter speed and the ISO value and basically do the readings, and it tells you the aperture. So if I'm like shooting during the sunny season, 1/125th of a second ISO 100, f8 or f11 maybe. And if it's like f16, I basically adjust my camera to the f16 to get the proper exposure. On the other hand, the X on the other hand can basically do also aperture priority. You can actually select the aperture value and the ISO value first, and it tells you the shutter speed. I don't do that. I most of the time have my shutter speed already locked into a specific value, 1/125th of a second if it's like super bright, 2/50th of a second in most cases, f8, f11, or maybe f16. Okay, so one of the major difference between the 308B and the 308X is that I was taking a BTS because it's kind of hard to see. Oh, you guys can see it. But on the far left, there's an aperture value, and on the far right, there's the shutter speed. And on the top, I guess, middle section, there's the ISO value. This format is like this. However, the X version is actually much more easier to see because on the left side you have the shutter speed because it's the shutter priority sort of like light meter, but you can choose aperture. On the right you have the aperture, and on the top you can see the ISO value. So the X version, you can basically see all the three values all at once, but the V version, if you look at it closely, you can't see the ISO value. And if you want to see the ISO value, you have to press this button right here to sort of like toggle it, you know. The ISO is 25 right now, but you can basically toggle it. You have to press the ISO value and then press the up button to like change the value of it. Why is it ISO 12 right now? But yeah, move this back to ISO 100 because that's what I use. And another difference between the B and the X is that if you can see the value, so let me just read it just once for you guys. 1/125th of a second, f1.4 on the B version. However, on the X version, I don't know if you guys can see. Okay, you guys can see it. You get an extra decimal. So this one's on one. You can only read up to 1.4. This one on the other hand, was it brighter, but it's like you can see it that it's like 2.88. So if you round the numbers, this becomes 2.9, and I guess some people might take that into account. So instead of like it's like 1.4, you know that's 1.4, but in reality it could be 1.49, so it could be 1.5 f1.5. So some people might want to do super precise readings. On the B version you can't do that, but the X version you can. So I myself don't look at the last decimal, but when I look at this f2.86, so it's like f2.9, how many seconds is that kind of? I don't have a calculator, so I can't do fast calculations, but some people will take that for granted and might want to opt for the X version. And speaking of the LCD screens, the X, the reason why the X, some people opt for the X is, I said it in the prior intro of the video, that this has a LCD screen that sort of like glows in the dark. You can't physically activate it. This basically automatically senses that there's not enough light, so it basically glows in the dark. So, and if you're just shooting during the day, like if there's like a lot of sun, a lot of like clouds, you won't have problems with the B version. But once the sun goes down and you're losing valuable light, and it becomes actually harder and harder to like read this, especially when the sun already just went down the horizon. So that's actually where the X comes into play, and where a lot of people tend to get the X version is that in my case there's a chance that when I'm like traveling somewhere I might be doing long exposures, but if I have the B version I can't do that, so I basically use the X instead. So depending on how I sort of like shoot most of the time, I basically use one for the other. And like I said in the beginning part of the video, the X version has also, in addition to shutter priority, after priority, which I never use unfortunately. I guess if you're in a studio and if you want to shoot at the specific aperture, I mean, it might be worth considering, but I basically don't shoot that style, like have this specific aperture, like, because in most cases when I'm shooting outside, it's either going to be f11 or f16 if it's like sunny, and I don't know, it doesn't feel right in my sense, because I want to like have a specific shutter speed beforehand and have that assigned, because I'm shooting with a 6:9 format. I don't want handshake introduced into my film negatives when I'm like shooting outside. So basically lock the shutter speed at 1/125th of a second and basically look at the f-stop, and if it's like too dark I might lower the shutter speed. That's like sort of like how I shoot. But yeah, you can also choose shutter priority, and if you like toggle the mode dial on here, you can basically change it to that sort of like shutter priority or aperture priority, or if you're using a flash, external flash or strobes, you can basically choose that. So yeah, on the X, major difference, or this might be the drawback of the 308B version, is that this one in particular does not have a battery indicator, unfortunately. And if you guys do know, the S and the X have a battery indicator, and if you can see right here on the top left, you can see that my battery is like dying. It's like on its last bar. It's similar to like a smartphone. So I can basically, after looking at this, if I'm going onto some kind of location, I can basically swap the battery for a new one, and I will be all right in most cases for like a couple of days or so. But the B, on the other hand, does not have that. So it's like alkaline batteries. So they basically run, and when they die off, it goes like and doesn't like function at all. It won't turn on. So that's actually one of the largest drawbacks of the Sekonic L-308B. But in most cases when I'm traveling, I basically always carry another AA batteries, because you never know what's going to happen with the batteries that's already in the unit. I mean, they could crop out anytime, so having a backup is essential. So I basically carry another AA battery. So this sort of like battery indicator, I basically don't look as much, sort of like when using something like a smartphone. But yeah, that's like one of the major differences between the 308B and the 308X. And honestly, there's not that much of a difference in terms of like the exteriors. I mean, the buttons are exactly the same. So you have the metering button at the top, and also the value where you can basically change the shutter speed or the ISO value. You have a down button and a top button. So that's basically exactly the same for these two units. And another area, I guess, is a super minor area, is I sometimes use flash during my workplace, is that when you toggle the mode area right here, mode button right here, let me get that here. There's an area of a lightning bolt, sort of like Harry Potter. When you click on that, actually, where is it? Oh, right here. Let me get it there. And when we press the reading, nothing happens. And I don't know if it's working, but let me have a flash. When I flash my unit, like so, it tells F8. And when I flash again, it goes into F4 and it starts to blink, actually, if you guys can see. So it's like constantly reading the value while it's like being flashed. However, there are times when this blinking doesn't blink, so you don't know if it's like activated. Oh yeah, looks okay. It's like there's a, I think it's a bug or something, but it kind of stops blinking. So I don't know if it's like being activated or not. However, on the 308X, they kind of, because this is like the third iteration, they like refined it. So if you guys can see, there's a lightning bolt. All the settings you can basically preview, and when you press the sort of like the mode dial, it kind of, the what you call the circle around the symbol basically changes, so you can basically tell which setting you are on. And if you select the thunderbolt right here, and when you press the meter, it basically, that cover of the lightning bolt basically sort of like blinks, and when you fire the shutter, let me just read it, let me just do that. It basically continuously keeps on blinking, actually. I don't know if you guys can see it, but it basically keeps on changing in that sense. Let me just change the, hopefully it changes in terms of values. So yeah, this is actually much more cleaner, honestly, and easier to see, because you know which setting is being currently used in that sense compared to the 308B. So yeah, that's one small minor area to like point out. Okay, so, and last but not least, this might be major for some people, but this is after using this for a considerable amount of time. The boot up time is actually considerably different, and not many people like mention this when I see various types of people who talk about the 308B. But there's basically a power button on the top right, and when it shuts down, you basically have to press it. But the amount of time it takes to like boot up on the 308B is roughly 4 to 5 seconds, and this 4 to 5 seconds for me is pretty daunting, because when you find something interesting, what I do is I always take out my light meter. I basically have to, like, you know, face it out my subject to do the reading. But and when it's like, you know, in standby mode, or not standby mode, but more like in so like shutdown mode, and when I want to like turn it on, there's this BR logo that shows up, and then it goes into the metering, which might tick a lot of people off, because this 4 or 5 seconds might be really precious. You're trying to capture something, but you take your light meter and you just try to like turn it on, but it takes 4 or 5 seconds, you lost that shot. I mean, that could happen, but in my case, I don't have those. I'm not in those like scenarios where I really want to grab a shot. Like I'm not a street photographer in that sense, so this might take off. While the 308, on the other hand, it takes roughly 1 to 2 seconds. This is 308. Turn it on. Bam. So it's like really, the 308X isn't that far in terms of like turning it on, but this one, on the other hand, it's like loading Windows XP or something back in the days. So there's this time lag that happens, especially on the 308B. I mean, for some people, you might be okay with it. In some cases, it kind of ticks me off. I'm like, oh, it's not booting yet. I want to read right now, kind of. So that's actually might be one of the larger sort of like areas to like note in terms of the difference between the 308B and the 308X. And yeah, like I said, the X and S, there isn't that much of a difference. The only difference between the X and the S is this LCD screen that basically glows in the dark if you're in a really dark environment, but they're basically mostly the same. And price wise, X is a little bit more expensive than the S because the S is sort of like in a way discontinued, if I'm right. So I guess if you just want all-in-one solution, the X might be worth it, but it is really pricey in terms of price. While the B, on the other hand, there's a lot of these like floating around on the market for more than half the price of the X. So, and I mean, if you're starting out, if you're shooting during the day, the B might be worth it. While if you're avid photographer in the night and you want precise, I guess, sort of like metering, the X might be the better bet. But this is just my biased opinion on both using the X and the B for a while. So yeah, hopefully I make some kind of clarification and a dedication on terms of the Sekonic's L-308 series, because they are basically the best bang for the buck if you're starting out in both film or in digital, or if you're using a flash. This is actually really nice. So yeah, that's basically it on my coverage of the 308 X, not X, but the B, in terms of comparing it to the X and the S. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, found it informative. If you have any questions, I'm happy to reply. And yeah, it's great. And there's a lot of people who basically does better in teaching on like using a light meter. Sekonic has their official sort of like YouTube channel, which basically brings in various types of photographers in the professional field, how they basically meter, especially using flashes and stuff like that. You can learn a lot on their official website. So yeah, I'll stick that too. And yeah, that's basically it on my video of talking about the Sekonic's L-308B. This was actually a great purchase for this year, which I forgot to stick in my previous video, but yeah. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, found it informative. We'll see you next time. Peace out.